All right, in the last video we looked at how do we define race sociologically. In this video we're going to think about whiteness and how whiteness is racialized or seen as a race. Is whiteness raced the same way as non-white groups, as Black, as Latinx, as Asian? Do we treat white the same way? Well, let's think about it. Do police officers treat whiteness the same way? Do politics? We talk about Black CEOs or Black presidents, but we don't talk about white presidents. When we talk about diversity and inclusion, we're talking about adding non-white people to the mix. When they talk about increasing diversity in television or movies, they're talking about having it not just be white people. And this should tell us a little bit about how whiteness is raced differently than other groups. Right? Whiteness serves as a kind of default because the people in power in our society are largely white and largely male. This means that unlike other groups, whiteness isn't like a marker. It goes unmarked. If we think about what that means, if you were driving and someone is maybe driving erratically and slow and you pull around them angrily and you look into the car and you see it's a lady there, you might go, damn women drivers. It's a way of marking a category. But whiteness often isn't marked, and white folks often prefer to go that way. They're not treated as a race, they're treated as individuals. And so whiteness is often raced differently vis-a-vis the other, the non-white groups. And often they're contrasted in terms of how they're categorized. So if we think back to the culture in which we're socialized in our society, we noted there's a dominant ideology, a mainstream culture. And this is largely reflective of white identity and white experience. And this leads to what Du Bois has called double consciousness for people of color. They're both socialized into that mainstream perspective. For example, think about popular music is largely, or pop music, is a category, and that category is largely, some people might call white music. Or proper or correct English, you may have been corrected several times, is often English spoken by the white majority, not by other folks who speak a different dialect. And again, this tells us that what's seen as normal or the default position is white. Go play any video game. If it doesn't have modifiable characters, the main character is often white and usually male, though it's getting somewhat more diverse. Think of the lead in every action movie. It's usually white and usually male. Right? So whiteness is unmarked, and part of what we see that's interesting about whiteness is that white people tend to get very offended when you call them on being white because they're not used to being raced. So if you tell someone they have privilege because of their whiteness, many young people get very offended by that. We'll look at privilege a little bit more later on. If, for example, I had a young student who got offended when a friend of hers thought she was racist for saying black people like hip hop and rap. And she's like, that's rude. She just assumed I was racist because I'm white. It was a very problematic statement. But what she was reacting against was somebody making an assumption about her on the basis of race because she wasn't used to being raced in that way. So what about ethnicity and race? What does this categorization mean? Ethnicity is a little different. Ethnicity means there's a shared group identity, shared culture, a sense of history, kind of kinship and belonging. These are often, whether there's a real history or if it's more created one, there's often a sense of shared lineage from somewhere. Coming from Puerto Rico, perhaps, or being Cherokee. If we think about those elements of culture, we're talking about language, religion, norms and values, belief systems, all of those can be made up in an ethnic group. This is a bit different from racial groups, which again are kind of based on how we look and are imposed by outside. Ethnic identities are often adopted. If I wanted to, I might, for example, try to claim my Irish heritage or my Welsh heritage. And there is a shared history there. There are shared languages and dialects, shared patterns of behavior. We mostly associate Irish with just drinking now, but that's not quite all there is to it. I don't. Most people would just call me white. But that's the difference between race and ethnicity. And what we see is these boundaries of who belongs and who doesn't can change over time. The quick and easy version of this, I often say, is if there is a restaurant test. I often ask students, is there such thing as an Asian restaurant? And they say, oh yeah, sure. And I say, is there really? There's Chinese restaurants, there's Japanese restaurants, but is there just an Asian restaurant or an African restaurant? You might find Ethiopian food. Food is a big part of shared culture, cuisine. If you go to Puerto Rico and you go to Cuba, you'll find very different types of food, maybe some commonalities, but overall different particular ingredients that come from their different areas. So ethnic groups are a little different from race, and as we'll see, ethnocentrism, or judging a group based on their culture and practices, is a little different. One thing we'll work over in our class time is identifying which of these is a racial or ethnic group. Does it claim a group identity, as an ethnic group would? Are there shared cultural practices? Think about it, won't you?